The alarm cut through the station before I even reached the docking ring, a low pulse of red light sweeping across every wall, and my hand was already on my sidearm before my brain caught up with what was happening. Someone was screaming down the corridor behind me. Not in pain, in panic, because word had spread in seconds that the ceasefire delegation had been ambushed, and the only survivor sitting in the middle of the wreckage was the one person every soul on this station had been taught to fear. I ran toward the commons instead of away from it, which is probably the only reason any of this happened at all. The room was in ruins, tables overturned, glass scattered across the floor like frost, smoke curling from a burned console near the far wall. Station security had already formed a wide circle at the entrance, weapons raised, none of them daring to step closer to the center of the room. In the middle of all that wreckage sat a single figure, calm, still, untouched, as if the chaos around her had simply decided not to include her in it. Vray Kesh, commander of the Kaltari fleet, the woman they called the Widowmaker, because 11 of our ships had gone dark under her orders before the war ended. She sat on an overturned bench with her hands resting on her knees, violet eyes scanning the frightened crowd, with an expression that gave away nothing at all. Nobody was moving to help her. Nobody was moving to arrest her either. They were just standing there, frozen, waiting for someone else to decide what happens next. A young officer beside me was shaking so hard his rifle rattled against his armor. I put a hand on his shoulder and told him to lower it. He looked at me like I had lost my mind. I walked into the room alone. Every step across that broken floor felt louder than the alarm still blaring above us. Nobody stopped me. Nobody dared to. I think, in that moment, everyone assumed I was either the bravest person on the station or the last person they would ever see standing. I stopped a few feet from her and looked down at the wreckage between us. A support beam had come loose from the ceiling and crushed part of the far wall. Scorch marks ran along the floor in a pattern too precise to be random. This wasn't an accident. This was a targeted strike, and she had been sitting right in the middle of it. I crouched down slowly, keeping my hands visible, and asked her the only question that mattered. "Are you hurt?" She turned her head toward me, violet eyes narrowing, studying my face, the way a predator studies something it hasn't decided is prey yet. "No," she said, but someone tried very hard to ensure that I would be. Her voice was steady. Too steady for someone who had just survived an explosion meant to kill her. I glanced around the room again, at the twisted metal, the scattered chairs, the still smoking console, and something cold settled in my stomach. Whoever did this hadn't just wanted her gone. They had wanted it to look like an accident nobody could trace back to a name. I offered her my hand. She looked at it like it was a foreign object she hadn't encountered before. Then, slowly, she took it and rose to her feet. The moment she stood, a second explosion tore through the far corridor, throwing both of us sideways as the lights above flickered and died. Emergency systems kicked in a heartbeat later, casting the room in a dim red glow. Screams echoed from somewhere deeper in the station. This wasn't over. Whoever wanted her dead had a backup plan, and it was still running. I pulled her behind an overturned table as debris rained down from the ceiling. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Instead, she looked at me with something between confusion and disbelief. "You are risking your life for mine," she said. "We were enemies less than a season ago." "We're not enemies right now," I told her. "Right now we're just two people trying not to die in the next 5 minutes. We can go back to arguing about the war later." Something flickered behind her eyes, an emotion I couldn't quite name, and for the first time since I had walked into that ruined room, she looked less like a legend and more like a person who was genuinely, quietly afraid. We moved together through the smoke, staying low, following the emergency lighting toward the maintenance corridor that connected to the lower docking bay. She moved fast, faster than I expected, her steps precise even through the chaos, and I realized quickly that whatever reputation she carried into that war had been earned honestly. A door hissed open ahead of us, and 2 figures stepped out, faces covered, weapons raised, clearly waiting for exactly this moment. I shoved her sideways into an alcove, a half-second before the first shot cracked through the corridor, sparks exploding off the wall where she had been standing. I returned fire, catching one of them in the shoulder, sending him stumbling backward into his partner. It bought us maybe 3 seconds. I grabbed her arm and pulled her through a side hatch, sealing it behind us, just as more shots slammed against the metal from the other side. Her breathing was quick now, controlled but quick, and for the first time she looked at me like she was actually seeing me instead of simply assessing a threat. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You do not know me. Your people have no reason to protect me." "Maybe not," I said. "But somebody just tried to murder an unarmed woman in the middle of a peace summit, and where I come from, that's not something we let happen quietly, no matter whose flag she flies." She stared at me for a long moment, the kind of stare that felt like it was rewriting something in her head, some rule she had believed for a very long time. We kept moving, cutting through service corridors, avoiding the main halls where the attackers clearly expected us to run. I knew this station better than most, having spent the last 6 months stationed here, and I used every shortcut I could remember to keep us ahead of whoever was hunting her. Halfway to the lower bay, she stopped suddenly, pressing her back against the wall, listening. "2 more," she whispered. "Ahead, not behind." I hadn't heard anything, but I trusted her instincts over my own in that moment. We backed into a side room, just as footsteps echoed past the doorway, slow and deliberate, searching. I held my breath. She held perfectly still beside me, closer than strangers usually stand, and I could feel the tension radiating off her like heat from a reactor core. When the footsteps faded, she exhaled slowly and looked at me. "You saved my life twice in the last 10 minutes, she said quietly. "I do not understand why a human soldier would spend his own safety on a stranger who once commanded a fleet that could have ended your entire species." "Because that's not who you are right now," I said. "Right now you're just someone who almost died sitting alone in a room full of people too scared to help you." I wasn't going to be one more person standing there doing nothing. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The alarm outside had quieted, replaced by the low hum of the station's backup systems cycling through repairs. Somewhere above us, security teams were finally moving in, sweeping the corridors, restoring order to a station that had nearly fallen apart in under 15 minutes. We reached the lower docking bay just as reinforcements arrived, a full squad moving in formation, weapons ready, faces tense until they saw her standing beside me, unharmed, breathing hard but alive. Their captain, a sharp-eyed woman named Grace Whitfield, lowered her weapon slowly and looked at me like she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. "You walked into an active combat zone to protect a Kaltari commander," she said. "I walked into a room to help someone who needed it," I answered. "Turns out that's exactly what happened." Grace studied Vrikesh for a long moment, then nodded once, motioning her people to stand down. The attackers, we would learn later, were part of a group determined to see the ceasefire collapse before it ever had a chance to hold. Radicals from both sides who believed peace was a weakness neither species could afford. Their plan had nearly worked. It would have worked if the room hadn't emptied out in fear instead of filling in with help. As medics moved in to check her over, Vrikesh turned back to me one last time before they led her toward the medical bay. "I have fought humans," she said. "I have studied humans. I believed I understood exactly what your species was capable of. Today, I learned that I understood only half of it." I didn't have a clever answer for that, so I just nodded and watched as she disappeared down the corridor, flanked by the same people who, an hour earlier, had been too afraid to stand near her. The station slowly came back to life around us, lights flickering back on, voices returning to something close to normal, the panic settling into exhausted relief. I stood there in the wreckage of the commons a while longer, thinking about how close everything had come to falling apart, and how strange it was that the moment that mattered most had started with nothing more than one person deciding to walk toward danger instead of away from it. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. Not a weapon, not a fleet, just one person willing to sit down, or stand beside, when everyone else chooses to stay away.